Ian McEwan was born in Aldershot, Hampshire, in England on the 21st of June 1948. He studied at the universities of Sussex and East Anglia and began his career as a writer in 1975 with a collection of short stories named First Love, Last Rites. He is known as Ian Macabre because of the dark tones in many of his works. In 1997 he published Enduring Love, a novel that is considered a masterpiece by the critics. Likewise, Atonement, published in 2001, received the same positive reviews and was described by The Observer as the best book he has ever written. The novel, which focuses on the theme of guilt, is divided into 4 parts. The first, which is almost half of the book, is dedicated to the narration of events that happened on a hot summer day in 1935 in the house of the Tallis family. Bryony Tallis, a 13-year-old girl, dreams of becoming a writer in her life. She has a vivid imagination and, on that day, she witnesses a scene that she does not understand and that she interprets in the wrong way. A passionate moment between her sister Cecilia and Robbie, the housekeeper's son. Something terrible and unforgivable, such as the erotic letter that Robbie writes Cecilia and that Bryony reads in secret. Another event occurs that same night in the park. Facts are not clear, and Bryony is once again witness to it. A sexual assault against her cousin Lola is reported in the family. Bryony puts the pieces together in her mind and blames Robbie, who will be unfairly arrested. In this first part, the many points of view immediately make us understand how the same episode can be perceived in different ways, depending on who the observer is. What we see is not reality, since the eyes are nothing more than a filter through which we create and see what we like most. Bryony believes that her sister is the victim of a maniac, and her endless imagination combined with a maniacal obsession for perfection leads her to confuse reality with narrative fiction. In the second part of the novel, we see a completely different scenario. We are in the Second World War after the defeat of Dunkirk. Cecilia, disgusted by her family's behavior, decides to leave the house where she has always lived and to attend a nursing school, while Robbie joins the army to be released from prison, finding himself atoning for a crime he did not commit. The protagonist of this chapter is guilt, a guilt that, at first individual, becomes now collective. Bryony would change her evidence. She would rewrite the past so that the guilty became the innocent. But what was guilt these days? It was cheap. Everyone was guilty, and no one was. Robbie and Cecilia write each other very romantic letters, dreaming of love and freedom. The narration is made rapid by the tragic and shocking context of the global conflict. In the third part, Bryony is 18. She realizes that she made a mistake and begins to understand the consequences of her actions. So she decides to become a nurse in order to soothe her guilt by helping the most needy. After Lola's marriage to what was a real rapist, Bryony visits Cecilia, who now lives with Robbie, and tells them that she wants to make amends by testifying and writing the whole truth. In the last part, the narrative is not impersonal and external, but becomes a first-person narrative. It is a 77-year-old Bryony, who now is an affirmed writer and is seriously ill, that tells us how she tried to atone for her guilt by writing a novel about what really happened, giving a happy ending to the story of Robbie and Cecilia. In fact, she reveals that she never made up with her sister, and that the two lovers died before the end of the Second World War. without being able to live their love story. In 2007, the novel Atonement was made into a movie, directed by Joe Wright, with Keira Knightley, James McAvoy and the young Saoirse Ronan in the cast. The differences between the book and the movie are almost imperceptible. The movie follows the division into parts of the book and the most important events, but focuses more on the drama of the separation rather than on the characterization and the thoughts of the individual characters. However, what is missing in terms of emphasis on words is replaced by the wonderful soundtrack by Dario Marinelli, which runs all the time alternating a note of the piano with the sound of the typewriter. One of the main themes of Ian McEwan's novel is the role of the writer and the writing, the tragic consequences and the power of words, at the same time creative and destructive. McEwan makes a self-criticism to the writer. Bryony's lie comes from the need to tell the truth, her truth, which is the wrong interpretation of reality. The narration, and therefore the definition of the truth, always passes through the author's personal filter, and this questions the writer's own morality. It is no coincidence that Bryony presents herself as a writer, and who is the writer if not a sort of little god who moves his characters? She represents the writer's authority and power. Her will to write comes from a desire to put order to what seems missing it, and to give meaning to facts, people, or actions that seem to be senseless. Fantasy, which is the basis of the act of creation, has a dual value here. It is the means by which an unconscious 13-year-old girl condemns two lovers to separation, and the means by which an adult and conscious writer tries to reunite them forever, thus atoning her guilt on paper. But how can a novelist achieve atonement when, with her absolute power of deciding outcomes, she is also God? There is no one, no entity or higher form that she can appeal to, or be reconciled with, or that can forgive her. There is nothing outside her. In her imagination, she has set the limits and the terms. No atonement for God, or novelist, even if they are atheist. These are the themes on which the book makes us reflect: guilt, atonement, and forgiveness. The guilt of a little girl who told a lie in order to protect the people she loved. And yet, although her gesture was in good faith, it is very difficult to be understanding and compassionate with the protagonist, given the devastating consequences it causes. This makes us wonder, when does a gesture become unjustifiable, and to what extent do good intentions matter? Atonement is the reparation for an offense and the liberation from it through the acceptance and endurance of the penalty imposed for that purpose. But how can you be freed from it when you don't obtain the forgiveness you seek? Without forgiveness, there can be no atonement, and there is nothing worse than having to live with the awareness of your own mistakes, without being able to do anything to fix them. And that is what will haunt Bryony until the end of her life, and it reminds us how important and perhaps necessary it is to try to make up for our mistakes and to reconcile with the people we have hurt before it is too late.